This lecture is going to be about cognitive development from birth to age 3. We'll look at some theorists and some different approaches for looking at how children learn, which is cognition, and then how development is influenced by both our home and our school environments. A little bit about early language development and how we can encourage it. And because I'm an early interventionist, working with children with special needs and identifying children who might have delays or special needs in the infant and toddler period, and then also looking at early literacy as well. So we really have a couple different approaches to working with children and helping them learn. The first one is the behaviorist. Then we have kind of a psychometric, Piaget, information processing, cognitive neuroscience, which is really just brain development, and then social contextual approach. And we'll go through all of those in detail. So when we're talking about behaviorists, we're looking at two different theorists. Pavlov, who is the guy on the left with the birds behind him. He did a lot of experiments on pigeons. That was his animal of choice. And then Pavlov, who is the guy on the bottom right, who is famous for his experiment with the salivating dog. He would give the dog dinner, ring a little bell, and then when he would ring the bell, the dog would automatically salivate. So that is called classical conditioning, and that is what Pavlov is known for. And then operant conditioning is what Skinner, the guy with the birds, is known for as well. So really the idea is that the child acts on the environment, and there are either negative or positive reinforcements in the child's life. So an example would be for an infant, a child sees their parents, they babble, blah, 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 and the parent smiles and they talk back, and the child in that way receives positive reinforcement from their parents, and they babble more in order to gain attention from their parents and bonding from their parents, and this encourages their language development. The opposite side would be if a child sees their parents and babbles, but the parent responds sometimes or doesn't respond at all. The child is going to try to get attention. They're going to ramp up their behavior, crying or screaming. And then after that, if they realize that babbling doesn't get them a response from their parents, they'll give up and they'll stop babbling to their parents, hurting their language development. So these guys are really the early theorists of cognition and how infants and toddlers learn. We realized that there were things in our environment that affect how children learn, and we can change that with either positive or negative reinforcement. Classical conditioning, let's see if I can play this. So this is an example of classical conditioning. Well, you can't hear it, but over the course of a night, these psych students had their little brother Tommy, who's the guy playing video games, and they would play Vanilla Ice's Ice Ice Baby, and then they would pelt him and throw ice at him. And so they did a bunch of different trials, and then at the end of the night, they just played Ice Ice Baby, but they didn't pelt him with ice, but he still ran from the room, anticipating that he was going to be pelted with ice. So every time he heard a song, he had a negative reinforcement of ice being thrown at him. And then that made him be conditioned by his psych older students. His sisters who were psych students, sorry. It's very unethical, please don't do this. He wasn't willing and he didn't consent to be studied, but it's a humorous way to illustrate negative reinforcements. So being pelted with ice is a negative reinforcement, then causes him to flee the room when he hears Vanilla Ice's Ice Ice Baby. Then there's the psychometric approach, which is really like IQ tests and things like that. The only reason I bring this up is that I use something similar to this, which is a Hawaii early learning profile. So we look at children in physical, social, emotional, fine motor, gross motor, self-help skills, all those areas, and we give them very specific age ranges. And we do this in order to identify services that a child might need. So if any of you are looking into possibly going into the special education field, this is a psychometric approach that you would use in order to understand the ability level of children cognitively and then in other domains as well. Then Piaget, and his name is Jean Piaget, and we're going to talk about him a lot throughout the class. But he is a man from Switzerland who was born in the late 1800s, and he actually died in the 1980s. And he is a giant in our field because he came up with stages of how we learn cognitively. So with our sensory motor stage, that is what we are born into. This is when we use our motor ability to influence and impact and explore our senses. So senses and motor ability, so sensory motor stage. We're using our reflexes and then our ability to walk, crawl, eat, things like that, to play with people and objects in our environment. So infants bringing things to our mouth to taste them, crawling to things to feel the wall or somebody's skin or what their legs feel like. Learning about yourselves and your immediate environment by using our motor skills and our sensory processing ability. So this is a really important stage, and we're going to talk about his first 5 stages that have to do with children. But the sensory motor stage is from when a child is first born and using their reflexes, all the way up until 2 when they're running and jumping and exploring their environment that way, so that they can start to understand what's around them by interacting with their 5 senses, what things taste like, what things sound like, what things feel like. All of our senses play into how we learn at such a young age. A big part of his cognitive theory of sensory motor development is object permanence. And so this is kind of a fancy way of saying peekaboo. So this little boy says, so you're telling me the teddy bear is still there even though it's out of sight. So me covering my eyes, whoo, will surprise a young child 3 months up until they're 18 months old as they're learning about object permanence. They're learning that even though an object or me is no longer visible, like you can't see me or something like that, it doesn't mean that I've ceased to exist. So mommy is still around even though she's playing peekaboo with me. So object permanence is a big part of Jean Piaget's sensory motor stage. Then we have information processing, and this is really how we look at perception, memory, and problem solving in our cognition. So how do we know how babies learn? We do experiments on them. We attach things to their brains, or we talk to their parents, or we see where their eye moves in their head in order to understand things. Another way that we can study children and infants is habituation. So really what this is you expose infant to a stimulus. And it's not like shocking them or anything like that. You could be putting a flashlight along a window, opening the blinds, something like that. And we look at the ability of the infant to process the information by measuring when they habituate. And habituate is just a fancy word for saying when they become bored. So if they are becoming bored very slowly or very fast, that's going to help us understand how long it takes them to process information. And that's a big way that we study children, is by habituation. And really what it is familiarity breeds boredom. So the more that they're exposed to something, the more that they'll habituate and be bored and look away from it. Then there's categorization. We're looking at and we're putting the world into different categories. So there's different genders, there's different ages, there's different people, there's dogs. Dogs are different than cats. As infants and toddlers are growing, they are learning these differences by categorizing the world. Piaget was one of the first people to theorize it. He thought that it started at 18 months, so about 1.5 years, but we're learning that about 3 months old is when children start to understand that there are differences in objects. And that's the first part of categorization, is knowing that a cat is different than a dog. And then later on, you'll be able to use your words and be able to sort dog and cat by using verbal communication. So there are lots of stages to it, but we do know that infants starting at about 3 years old are able to pick up on differences, and then they will start to categorize things as well. And then there's causality. So one event causes another. So that's something that we can look at with infants is if they kick a mobile, and it makes noise, then they will start to learn that their own feet are causing that, and they will do it more. There's play gyms, which are, the kind of the dome-shaped things that you put children under and they can bat at and stuff like that. Some of them have pianos at the feet, and if you kick it, it will play music. And children very early on know and learn that if I kick this piano, I will cause it to play music for me. And so they will do it over and over again. That's why music-making toys are so popular with infants. You press a big button, music plays. That is causality for a young child. Then we have the cognitive neuroscience, and this is really just a fancy way of saying brain development. And if you've ever seen a commercial for first 5 or 0 to 3, the first 3 and then the first 5 years are tremendous brain growth. And that's why early childhood education is so important. We want to make sure that children are given every opportunity to learn and to think and to explore their environment so that their brain makes as many connections as it can. There's little neurons in our brain, and there's hundreds and thousands of millions of them. And as we use them, they get bigger and stronger, and they make connections between each other, and that's what gives us a lot of our cognitive ability. If you don't use it, it's use it or lose it. They will be pruned, they'll die off, and we won't have them as much. So we want to make sure that we are offering children as many opportunities to play and to explore their environment so they can learn and be as smart and as cognitively gifted as they can. In different parts of development, different parts of the area are going to be kind of more active. So throughout this class, I will give you information about how the brain is developing, how an infant and how a teen and what their brains are developing are going to be really different. The areas are going to be very different as well. So for an infant and toddler, the prefrontal part, so the very beginning part of it, that's where a lot of cognition is located, and we will see that on brain scans. If you were to scan an infant's brain by giving them a CAT scan, you would see this part of their area more lit up, making more connections between those neurons and learning more and more. We also know that the hippocampus, which is deep, deep, deep inside of our brain, is making memories possible. And so with memory development, with infants and toddlers, they have explicit memory. So those are facts, names, events, conscious memories, and those are what toddlers are starting to learn. They know mama, they know dada, doggy, cookie. They're learning names and facts. They're sorting things into categories. They know what events are. They know what Chuck E. Cheese is, that type of stuff. When you say go to the playground, they know what that means. Before that, for our younger infants, they really have implicit memory. So it's just kind of feelings, not really conscious ability. You have more muscle memory, that type of stuff. You know that you're loved and cared for, but you're not really making any strong memories or being able to recall facts, names, or events. And that's why you can't remember being born or what you did as an infant, because you didn't have the brain ability to have explicit memory and be able to recall past events or anything. The image on the left is just a humorous little thing about a toddler's brain, what they're into and things like this: kissing, loving, Elmo, eating goldfish, Play-Doh, stuff like that. The social, then we also have how we learn within our social context. So we all live in a culture and a time and in a place that I've talked about a bit before. So we are all kind of living right now in 2018 in Southern California. And that our culture and our society plays into a lot of how we are going to raise our children. And culture also affects our language development as well. So how we talk to and how we speak to children is really different than other cultures. The most important thing, though, is that children are spoken to so that they can have language development. So in Western cultures, in the United States especially, we have sing-song tones. That's called parent-ease or mother-ease. It's a high sing-songy voice. It's designed to bring attention to our mouths and our face so children can see what we're doing and saying. And it does encourage language development. I have a picture of some women from Papua New Guinea, and they don't have a lot of special considerations for infants. What they typically do is they have an infant on my lap, and then a person next to me would have a conversation with the infant, and then I would answer for the infant, like in the voice of the infant. So a person and an infant would have a conversation. I would be like the medium for the child. Turns out that this is a perfectly wonderful way for children to learn language as well. It's very different than how we do. There's no considerations for like high sing song or anything like that. But because the child is being spoken to and is part of the culture, and this is how that they have decided how they learn, then it means that children's language development is very appropriate as well. So across cultures, as long as children are being spoken to, then their language will progress. Also with Skinner language, when it comes to learning, children learn the language because their parents speak to them. So we make noise and they reinforce it. And you'll see this a lot with bilingual children. They are being exposed to two languages, either within their home or one language at school and one language at home. They're going to learn both languages because their parents and their caregivers around them are speaking two languages. Some other thoughts though. There's lots of different other people who talk about different forms of thought, but in this class, we're really more focused on just the basic ideas of children learn language because parents interact with them in those languages. There are two types of languages though. There's receptive, so that's what you hear, and there's expressive, which is what you speak. So with receptive language, it's kind of understanding and hearing. So in ages 0 to 3, you should be able to point to body parts, nose, eyes, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, that type of stuff. And then by the time you're 3, you're pointing to it on a doll. So on your baby doll, you can point to their knees, their nose, their fingers, their thumb, that type of stuff. So it's a little bit more detailed. They should also be able to follow commands. So for an infant, giving them a bottle and saying, drink your bottle, it's very visual. But then by the time they're 3 years old, it should be like a 2-step command, like give mommy your plate and daddy your cup, that type of thing. So there's 2 different commands with 2 different actions, and a child should be able to comply with this. They should be able to identify nouns, verbs, prepositions by an action. So I'd say jump, a child could jump. Go up the slide, a child could go up the slide. Drink this, eat that, pick up the red one, pick up the green one, all things that they should be learning by the time they're 3. And then they should respond to their own name, and they should respond to no. That doesn't mean they're going to comply. Never did I say that a toddler will comply to no. They will probably do the opposite. But if you say no, they'll look up at you, or they'll stop playing for a second, or if you say their name and they'll think about it, they might listen to you. But a toddler is a toddler, and they are known for being willful, and next lecture we'll go more into social and emotional, temper tantrums, fighting, that type of stuff. So then expressive, what can you speak? So we're looking at the ability to speak and to communicate. So babbling for our young infants, all the way to being able to say like, I want cookie, or give me that for a 3-year-old. So they have 3 to 4 word sentences. Typically, children will start acquiring lots of language. They'll be adding words and words and words. And then once they have 50 words that they can say spontaneously, so they can see cookie, dog, cat, meow, eat, rug, that type of stuff. Once they have 50 words that they can say and they can point to something and they know what it is, then they can start to combine them. So around age 2, they should be able to say, want that, need cookie, let's go, park now, that type of stuff. They'll also start to learn sentence structure and tenses as well, but it will often be wrong, so they don't have a very sophisticated understanding. I did it for a past tense. They don't know that those types of things, and that's perfectly okay. They're going to pick it up just by hearing how people talk. So some areas of concern, though, would be an area of articulation, so how the words sound, or an inability to produce sounds at all. So if a child isn't talking at 1.5, 2 years old, or if they are talking, but it's very difficult to understand them, that would be an area where we might want to get some additional social services involved. So when we are talking about encouraging cognitive ability, so encouraging the ability to learn, what you really need is a secure attachment. So you need to have a parent or guardian or caregiver in your life who plays. Play is the work of the child. That's something that Maria Montessori, an educational person, said. Play is the work of a child. And so we know that it's really important when children play, they explore their environment, they crawl, they jump, they do all of these things so that they can get smarter cognitively. Children need to bond with a caregiver at their school or daycare. I think 50% of children born within the first year, their parent both their parents have gone back to work. So while parents work, we need quality education for young children where they can go and they can have caregivers who work with them and model skills and words for new children, in addition to being loving and caring with our very young infants and toddlers who go into preschools or daycares. They're typically grouped by their age, so 0 to 12 months, 1 to 2-year-olds, and then 2 to 3-year-olds. Each age group has their own milestones, and that's why we've broken this down. So you typically don't want to see toddlers trampling infants. That can be challenging to manage in daycare centers. In a home daycare, it would be different. You would have less children, and so it would be easier to manage. But in a center where you would have 12 children in a classroom, having a 3-year-old and a 6-week-old could be kind of difficult to manage, and that's often while they're broken up so that they can work on their milestones with peers who are of their own age. So some delays that are evident we want to talk about. So some of them are at birth. So we talked about Down syndrome a couple lectures ago, fetal alcohol syndrome. So those types of things you're going to know about at birth, and you get social services. But what if a child in your life is a little bit older, they're an infant or a toddler, and you're noticing some delays? If the parents agree, they can be referred through their pediatrician, or they can self-refer to a social services group. You can literally call San Diego Regional Center, First 5, or Rady Children's, get on their hotline number and say, I have concerns about my child's development. I'd like them to be assessed, and they will be able to help you. Some of the red flags, though, since we've been talking about physical milestones and now cognitive milestones, would be a child that doesn't crawl. They're not hands and legs crawling by a year. They're not walking by 18 months. They don't make sounds or babble or have one word by 1 year old. So typically by 1, they should be making sounds. They should be babbling, baba, dada, stuff like that, and then maybe saying mama or dada at a parent. They should be combining words at 2 years old. So they should have 50 words that they can say. They can point out light, rug, all this type of stuff. And then they're starting to combine it. Want that, give me, things like that at 2 years old. And then if they're not making eye contact or trying to get your attention, so they just play by themselves all day long without making eye contact, or they don't look up at airplanes or things that are happening around them, that might indicate some social and emotional issues, and we might want to refer them for that. And then cognitively, what would you IQ test a child on? They can't write, their speaking ability is limited. So we look at things like being able to stack blocks or nest cups or object permanence. That's what's telling us that a child cognitively is doing okay. Then literacy. So this is from B.F. Skinner. He was one of the first people that I talked about in this class, in this lecture. He was the guy with the birds behind him who does operant conditioning. So that's B.F. Skinner. And he had a lot of really great ideas on how we should raise children. And his quote about literacy is, we shouldn't teach great books. We should teach a love of reading. Knowing the contents of a few works of literature is a trivial achievement. Being inclined to go on reading is a great achievement. So that's really what we're looking for, and some of the best advice that I ever got as a mother myself was to let children pick out their books. So from birth, I have tried to surround them with as many books as possible, and then they typically pick out the book that they want to read to me. Now I take my 6-year-olds to the library or to a bookstore, and they can pick out whatever books they want. Sometimes I think they're ridiculous, or, it's about ghosts at a high school. I don't even understand what some of the books they have that I have to read these chapter books with them. I think they're very silly or not very good, but they like them, and that encourages them to read. And really, at the end of the day, comic book, hard book, chapter book, Amelia Bedelia, I don't really care as long as they are reading, and I'm hopefully instilling in them a love of reading that will carry them through their lifetime. Now that my daughters are in kindergarten, their only homework through Oceanside Unified is that I need to reach them 20 to 30 minutes a day, a book of their choosing, but for our little ones, our infants and toddlers, starting with short books many times a day. So my 1.5-year-old can sit through a 4-page board book where we just say lion, rawr, hippo, penguin, and then she walks away, because her attention span is very short at that age. She's 1.5. It's very different from a 6-year-old who can sit for 20 minutes. 0 to 3 as well, we're looking at board books, large pictures, maybe the pullout, or it's got texture on it, anything to bring a lot of attention to it. And then I'm also modeling it by yay and making sounds, roar, meow, woof, stuff like that to bring interest to the book and to the idea of literacy. And that way, I'm modeling vocabulary. So we're looking at the lion and we're saying lion, and I'm reinforcing it through repetition. So we read this damn hippo book 50 times a day, but now she can say the word hippo. So it also models how books work. So I'm turning the pages. So we're looking left to right, how the words are on the page, and then that the words have meaning. So print has meaning. They're starting to pick up on that in infants and toddlers as well. They are starting to understand that there's these squiggles on a book and it means something because mommy says specific words. But the biggest thing and how we teach that is just by having fun reading with them. So it really goes back to that home environment, having a caregiver who loves you, who will play with you. So cognitive development starts at birth, and it's really supported by secure attachments. So somebody who wants to spend time with you, who plays with you, who takes you to parks, who reads books with you, that is really important, and that's what helps our cognitive development. By having somebody who goes through life and who actively explores their environment with you, and then models skills like running, jumping, stacking blocks, putting things in things, scribbling on paper, all of those things are reinforced through repetition with that caregiver who you've developed a really strong attachment and bond with. So this is the end of the lecture. I will see you guys in the discussion board.